The night of July 11th, 2024, draped rural Virginia in a cloak of stifling heat. The air was heavy, thick with the kind of humidity that clings to the skin and muffles sound, turning the world into a damp, breathless hush. It was just past 10:30 p.m., and James, he'd asked that his real name not be used, was steering his pickup truck down a familiar stretch of backroad, a narrow thread of asphalt slicing through the wilderness of his home county. A mechanic in his late 30s, James knew these roads intimately, their twists and turns etched into his muscle memory from years of driving them. Tonight, though, something felt off, a subtle itch at the base of the skull he couldn't quite place. He'd spent the evening at a friend's place a few miles outside town. Nothing unusual, just a handful of guys playing cards, sipping beers, trading stories under the flicker of a porch light. The kind of night that ends with quiet drive home, the world beyond the windshield a blur of shadowed trees and starless sky. Rusty, his wiry hound dog, rode shotgun, ears twitching, snout pressed to the cracked window, snuffling at the night air. James kept the radio low, a murmur of country tunes barely audible over the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of tires on pavement. The headlights cut a pale swath through the dark, illuminating the road ahead in a tunnel of light that seemed to shrink the vastness of the forest pressing in from both sides. The road dipped into a shallow valley, a place where the trees grew denser, their branches arching overhead to form a jagged canopy that swallowed what little moonlight might have pierced the clouds. James's fingers tightened on the wheel, an unconscious reflex, as Rusty let out a sound, a low, guttural growl that rumbled deep in the dog's chest. It wasn't the playful yip Rusty gave a raccoon or the sharp bark at a passing car. This was different, a sound James had never heard from his companion before, laced with something raw and instinctual. Rusty's head snapped toward the window, his body stiffening, eyes locked on the blackness beyond the glass. James's gaze followed, peering into the void where the headlights reached faded. At first, there was nothing, just the endless dark, the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a breeze too weak to feel. Then, a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting against the deeper shadows of the forest. His pulse quickened, a dull thud in his ears, as he squinted to make sense of it. Something stood in the road ahead, caught in the stark glare of the headlights. At a glance, it resembled a deer, a buck, larger than most, its antlers a chaotic sprawl of points rising like twisted branches. But as the seconds stretched, the shape grew wrong, impossibly wrong. The creature's legs were too long, unnaturally thin, bending at angles that no deer should. They looked fragile, almost brittle, yet held the weight of a body that seemed too massive for them. Its head was tilted, cocked to one side in a way that suggested a break rather than a pose, the neck elongated and sinewy. And those eyes, James's breath hitched as he met them, too bright, sickly yellow orbs that didn't reflect the light like a deer's would. They glowed, unblinking, staring straight through the windshield with an intensity that pinned him in his seat. Rusty's growl erupted into a frantic bark, the dog's paws scrabbling at the door, claws scraping against the upholstery as if he'd claw his way out, or at the thing staring back. James slammed on the brakes, the truck jerking to a stop with a shudder that rattled the frame. Dust kicked up from the road, swirling in the headlight beams like a thin fog. The creature didn't flinch. It stood there, 20 feet ahead, its silhouette a grotesque parody of nature, framed in the harsh light. The air inside the cab thickened, a sour stench seeping through the cracked window, rotting meat and wet fur, a smell that clawed the back of James's throat and made his eyes water. He couldn't move, couldn't look away, his hands locked on the steering wheel as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. The thing's body shimmered, not with motion, but with a strange, fluid quality, as if its edges weren't fixed, as if it might dissolve and reform in the blink of an eye. Its antlers gleamed faintly, catching the light in a way that made them look wet, slick with something James didn't want to name. The legs shifted, a subtle twitch, and then it moved. Not like any deer James had ever seen. No graceful leap, no skittish bound. It crossed the road in a single unnatural stride, its limbs folding and unfolding like a spider's, a liquid motion that defied bone and muscle. The underbrush swallowed whole, the leaves rustling faintly, too faintly, for something so large, leaving only silence in its wake. James sat there, the engine idling, his chest heaving as he sucked in shallow breaths. Rusty's barking faded to a whimper, the dog pressing himself low against the seat, ears flat, eyes darting toward the window. The road stretched empty before them, the headlights illuminating nothing but asphalt and dust. How long he stayed like that, James couldn't say. Time seemed to unravel, seconds bleeding into minutes as the night pressed closer, heavier. Finally, his foot eased off the brake, the truck rolling forward, slow at first, then picking up speed as if motion could shake the image burned into his mind. The drive home blurred into a haze of adrenaline and dread. When he pulled into his driveway, the familiar shape of his small house loomed ahead, its windows dark and uninviting. He cut the engine, the sudden silence deafening, broken only by the faint ticking of the cooling motor and Rusty's uneven panting. James didn't get out right away. He sat there, staring at the steering wheel, the keys dangling from the ignition, his hands trembling faintly. The trees beyond his yard swayed in the breeze, their branches clawing at the sky, and every rustle made his head snap up, searching the shadows. That night, sleep eluded him. He kept the lights on, every bulb in the house blazing, casting sharp shadows across the walls. The curtains stayed drawn, a flimsy barrier against whatever might be watching from outside. Rusty didn't leave his side, curling up tight against James's legs on the couch, the dog's eyes flicking to the corners of the room as if tracking something unseen. Every creak of the old house, every groan of the floorboards, sent a jolt through James's nerves, his pulse racing as he strained to listen past the hum of his own breathing. The smell lingered in his memory, that rancid mix of decay and musk, clinging to his senses like a stain. Morning came slow, the gray light of dawn creeping through the cracks in the curtains. James couldn't stay inside any longer. The walls felt too close, the air too still. He grabbed Rusty's leash, loaded the dog into the truck, and drove back to the spot. He needed to see it in daylight, needed to prove to himself it was just a trick of the night, a deer warped by shadows and fatigue. The road looked mundane under the sun, a stretch of cracked asphalt flanked by green thickets and the dull brown of summer-dry grass. He parked where he'd stopped the night before, the tire marks still faintly visible in the dust, and stepped out, Rusty trailing behind, nose low to the ground. The valley was quiet, the only sounds a chirp of birds and the distant hum of cicadas. James walked to the edge of the road, his boots crunching on gravel, his eyes scanning the underbrush where the thing had vanished. At first there was nothing, no tracks, no snapped twigs, no sign of anything passing through. But then he saw it, a patch of flattened grass, The blades pressed down as if something heavy had stood there. The soil beneath was dark, slick with a wet sheen that didn't match the dry earth around it. That smell hit him again, faint but unmistakable. Rotting meat and wet fur, rising from the ground like a memory made solid. No hoof prints, no claw marks, just that slick, unnatural stain that made his stomach twist. James stood there a long time, staring at the spot, the sun climbing higher but offering no warmth. Rusty whined, tugging at the leash, unwilling to get closer. The forest loomed around them, its shadows deeper than they should have been, its silence thicker. James didn't linger. He couldn't. He climbed back into the truck, Rusty scrambling in after him, and drove home, the image of that stain seared into his thoughts. 4 days later, on July 15th, 2024, he typed up his account and sent it to Lon Strickler at Phantoms and Monsters, asking to stay anonymous. He didn't want the attention, didn't want people poking around his life. He just needed to tell someone, to get it out of his head and onto paper. In his report, James described it exactly as he'd seen it. An abnormally large buck, fluid in its movements, with long, thin legs and bright yellow eyes that didn't reflect light like a normal animal's. He wrote about the smell, the single stride across the road, the way it left him and Rusty shaken. He didn't call it a not deer. That name came from others who'd read the story online, connecting it to tales of similar creatures. But the details matched. The account spread fast, shared across forums and X, a viral thread of unease that hooked readers with its raw, unpolished terror. For James, though, it wasn't about the buzz. It was about what he'd seen, what he couldn't unsee, a thing that wasn't a deer, wasn't anything he could name, and the way it had fractured the quiet safety of his world. He still drive that road when he has to, but never after dark. The windows stay up, the doors locked, Rusty pressed close on the seat beside him. Every shadow that flickers in the headlights makes his breath catch. Every rustle in the trees sets his nerves alight. He doesn't talk about it much, not to friends, not to family. Just lets the story live online, a warning or a confession. He's not sure which. But late at night, when the house creaks and the wind whispers through the trees, he wonders if it's still out there, watching from the dark with those yellow eyes, waiting for the next pair of headlights to catch its gaze.